All right, so today we are going to take a deep dive into the sometimes treacherous world of international business expansion.
Ooh, treacherous. I like it.
Well, yeah, it can be, right?
It can.
I mean, there's a lot to think about.
Oh, absolutely.
We're focusing specifically on greenfield investment, that's where you're actually building a subsidiary from scratch in a brand new country.
You're really planting your flag.
Yeah, exactly.
Starting fresh.
And I think a lot of our listeners are probably dealing with this in some way or another. Maybe they are prepping for a big meeting or doing some research for their company.
Or just fascinated by the idea.
Yeah, exactly. Or just can't resist a good deep dive like us.
Yeah.
So to guide us through all of this, we are going to be looking at this really interesting master's thesis.
Yeah.
It's out of the KTH Royal Institute of Technology in Stockholm.
Mm-hmm.
And they really went deep on this. They interviewed all sorts of experts in the field.
And I think what's really interesting is that they specifically looked at French companies expanding within the Schengen area.
Yeah.
But the insights, I think, are applicable
Oh, absolutely.
to any company anywhere that's even thinking about going global.
Yeah, because the challenges are often the same. So one of the things that this thesis really stresses, and I found this really interesting, is that before you even start thinking about spreadsheets and market research,
Mm-hmm.
you need to ask
A
yourself,
big existential question.
yeah, like why? Why are we doing this?
But why go international in the first place?
Right. Is this actually going to help our company achieve its goals?
Yeah. Is this really the only way
Right.
to achieve those goals?
Right.
Because going global, it can be a risky move, right?
Oh, yeah. Especially if you're a smaller company.
Imagine you're like a small business owner.
Right. You don't have those endless resources.
Yeah. What could keep you up at night when thinking about expanding abroad?
I think that's a great way to think about it.
The thesis really highlights some of those major concerns.
Like what are we talking about here?
Well, international expansion can be a huge drain on your resources, so you really have to have that plan in place.
Yeah.
You need to be sure that your company's healthy enough to even withstand some of those challenges that are going to come with, setting up shop in a new country.
So it's really not about the age of your company. It's about being prepared.
Right. It's about being ready.
Yeah. So let's say you've answered those really tough why questions and you've decided, okay, we're going to do this thing.
Right.
How do you plant your flag in a new territory?
Well, the thesis explores a bunch of different strategies like acquisitions,
Mhm.
joint ventures. But to keep things, focused for today,
Sure.
we're going to zero in on what they call organic growth
Mm-hmm.
through creating a subsidiary. So it's that build-it-yourself approach.
So you're really starting from scratch. It seemed like that would take a while.
It does. It
Uh-huh.
does. One of the things that surprised me in this thesis is that it can take anywhere from 3 to 15 years for a subsidiary to actually become profitable.
15 years.
15 years. So you really have to
Oh,
be,
longer than I would have thought.
oh yeah, you really have to be in it for the long haul.
Wow.
And it makes you realize how crucial that planning stage is.
Right, absolutely. You can't just wing it.
There is no room for improvisation.
Yeah.
The thesis is very clear about that. When it comes to creating a solid business plan,
Mm-hmm.
absolutely no room for improvisation. It's all about the meticulous details, from extensive research, audits,
Due diligence.
thorough due diligence. You need to identify every single potential risk, mitigate those risks.
That sounds intense.
It is, but there are resources out there.
Oh, there? Okay, good.
Yeah, the thesis suggests that companies should really look at bringing in some specialized firms or individuals who really know the ins and outs of the local market.
So they're like your Sherpas,
They're your guides, yeah.
leading you up the mountain.
Exactly. They can help you connect with locals, expats,
Right.
people who have firsthand experience in that market.
Speaking of insider knowledge, didn't the thesis have that funny anecdote
Oh, yes.
about the Suze bottles?
The Suze bottles.
In Germany.
It's a French company trying to launch their Suze bottles in Germany, and they have this big product launch.
This is a drink.
It's a drink, yeah. And they have this big product launch, and it totally derails because they didn't realize that their bottles were too tall for the German supermarket shelves.
Oh, no.
Can you imagine?
The logistics of that.
It's such a small detail, but it had huge consequences.
It's those little cultural differences, right?
Exactly. And the thesis also stresses something else really important, and that's having a solid exit strategy.
Oh, right, because sometimes things don't work out.
Sometimes things don't work out.
You have to be prepared for that.
You got to be prepared to pivot or even withdraw from the market altogether.
Right.
Especially when you think about the costs associated with liquidating assets
Mm-hmm.
in a foreign country. It's like an insurance policy for your international expansion.
Okay, so we've talked about why you need to think carefully about why you even want to expand internationally. We've touched on how you might go about setting up a subsidiary, the importance of planning. But how do you actually figure out what to sell in a new market? How do you conquer a new market?
Oh, yeah. Now we're getting into the nitty-gritty.
Now we're talking.
That's where the market analysis comes in.
Yeah.
Understanding the competitive landscape and figuring out how your company fits into all of that.
How do you stand out?
Yeah, how do you differentiate yourself?
Right.
Exactly.
Okay, so you've pored over your meticulously detailed business plan, got that exit strategy in your back pocket, and now you're ready to conquer this new market.
But how do you even begin to understand the lay of the land, the competitive landscape in a completely new country?
Yeah. It's like showing up at a party where everyone already knows each other.
Right, and you're trying to
Break in.
Yeah, break into the conversation.
Figure out the vibe.
Exactly.
So where do you even start?
Well, the thesis really drives home the point that you need to do your homework.
Okay.
And I'm not just talking about your direct competitors.
Right.
It's about understanding the overall market dynamics. What are the customer preferences in this new market? What are the established ways of doing business?
So it's about finding your place in this new ecosystem.
Exactly.
So you can't just replicate what you're doing back home.
Right. You have to be ready to adapt.
You have to adapt.
Yeah. And that brings us to a really important concept in international business, the unique selling proposition, or USP.
Okay. Yeah, the USP.
What makes your company different? What problem are you solving better than anyone else in that market? This is what's going to help you stand out.
I get it. So you've got to have that special something that makes customers go, wait, I need that.
I need what you have.
Yeah. But how do you even figure out your USP in a new market?
Well, I love this quote from one of the interviewees in the thesis. They said, export the company's knowledge and do what they know.
So you're basically taking what you're already good at and figuring out how it fits into this new context.
You're leveraging your strengths, your core competencies, and finding a way to tailor them to this new environment.
So don't try to be something you're not. Play to your strengths.
Exactly.
But even with a killer USP, even if you've got this amazing product or service, breaking into a new market can't be easy.
It's tough. You're the new kid on the block, right?
Right. So how do you build that trust with customers who might be a little hesitant to try something new?
Well, the thesis argues that first impressions are everything. Think about it.
Okay.
If you have a bad experience with a company, especially a new company, are you really going to give them a second chance?
Probably not.
Probably not. So you really have to make sure that you're putting your best foot forward.
So what are some concrete ways that companies can build that initial trust and make a good first impression?
Well, the thesis highlights the importance of understanding those local business customs and practices. It's the little things, like how you address people, the formality of business meetings, all of that can really impact how you're perceived.
So even if you have an amazing product, but you're kind of clueless about the local culture, you could be setting yourself up for failure.
It's a recipe for disaster, honestly.
Wow.
Yeah. The thesis uses the example of Target.
Target, like the American store.
Yeah, Target. They tried to expand into Canada.
I didn't know that.
And it failed.
Really?
Spectacularly. They basically tried to just impose their American values and their way of doing business on Canadian consumers.
And it didn't work?
And it didn't work. They didn't take the time to understand the nuances of that market, and it cost them.
That's a pretty big reminder that you really can't underestimate the importance of cultural sensitivity.
No matter how big you are.
Yeah.
Cultural sensitivity is key.
Right. But even with those cultural differences, there's another layer we need to talk about, right?
Oh, absolutely.
The institutional landscape.
Right. And institutions, both in your home country and your target market, can be both barriers and opportunities to your expansion.
Okay, so they can either help you or hinder you, depending on how you navigate them.
Exactly.
All right, let's start with the barriers. The thesis gets into some pretty intense stuff here. Political instability, corruption.
This is the heavy stuff.
Yeah.
But these are factors that are, largely outside a company's control.
Right.
But they can completely make or break your expansion.
I can imagine. And the thesis, it doesn't just talk about these issues in the abstract, right?
No, they use some real-world examples.
Yeah, like what?
Well, there's the story of a construction company that had all of their projects frozen because of a sudden political shift.
Wow, that's got to be devastating.
Devastating. Think about the disruption, the financial impact. And then there's another example of a company that had to navigate these really complex bribery schemes,
Oh,
which
man.
obviously puts their reputation at risk.
And their ethical standards?
Exactly. And it's a reminder that you need to be prepared for anything
Yeah.
when you're operating in a new country.
You never know what's going to happen.
You really don't.
Okay, so those are some pretty intense barriers. But beyond political instability and corruption, what are some other institutional barriers that companies might face?
Well, the thesis really stresses the importance of understanding those local business ethics and compliance regulations.
Okay.
Because even if something's considered normal or common practice in a certain country, if it goes against your company's values, it could do serious damage to your brand, your reputation.
Yeah, you don't want to compromise your values just to do business somewhere new.
Exactly. You have to hold on to those, even when it's tough.
Okay, so there are the ethical considerations, but then there are also the practical matters, right? Like understanding the local legal and economic regulations.
Oh, yeah. All of that can impact your bottom line.
Like what kind of things are we talking about?
Things like contract law,
Mm.
capital repatriation rules, tax policies, customs duties.
It sounds like you need a whole team of lawyers just to figure all that out.
It can be a lot,
Yeah.
but let's not just focus on the negative, right?
Okay.
We have to talk about those institutional opportunities as well.
Because there are some, right?
Oh, there are.
Okay, good.
Don't forget, governments can actually be really powerful allies in your expansion journey.
Okay.
Think about embassies, consulates, trade councils. They offer a wealth of knowledge and resources, and a lot of times it's for free or low cost.
Wow, so they're like your cheat code for navigating a new country.
Exactly.
What other institutional opportunities are out there?
Well, the thesis also mentions the importance of tapping into networks of expats and those local business associations.
Right, so people who've already kind of walked the path.
Exactly. They can offer incredible insights and support.
It's like having this built-in network of mentors.
Guiding you along the way.
Yeah, they can help you avoid all the common pitfalls and make that transition a little bit smoother.
And, they're not free, but private sector consulting and law firms can also provide valuable support, especially when it comes to navigating those complex legal and regulatory frameworks.
Right, so they're kind of like your navigators through this jungle of international business.
Exactly.
Okay, so we've talked about conquering the market, navigating the institutional landscape, but there's another layer we need to talk about, right? Cultural differences.
Yes, the human element.
Right. And this is where things can get really tricky because even between countries that seem similar on the surface, those cultural differences can have a huge impact on your success.
Absolutely. And it goes beyond just knowing when to bow or shake hands, right?
Right? Oh, way beyond that.
It's about understanding those deep-seated values and assumptions that shape how people interact and do business.
It's like speaking a different language, even if you're using the same words.
Exactly. And you're bound to have miscommunications, missed opportunities,
Right.
if you're not aware of those nuances.
So the thesis, how does it break down those cultural differences? What do we need to be aware of?
Well, they break it down into two main areas: business culture and corporate culture.
Okay, and understanding both is critical.
Absolutely.
Okay, so let's break down these two areas of culture a little bit more.
Okay.
What do we need to know about business culture to be successful internationally?
The thesis has this great example about contract negotiations
Oh, yeah.
in the U.S. It's usually very procedural.
Okay.
Lots of back and forth,
Right.
Meetings, everything documented, very meticulously documented.
Everything by the book.
Yeah.
Whereas in some Gulf countries, it might be more about those personal relationships, those unspoken cues, building trust over time.
Yeah, it's a totally different approach.
It's not just what you say.
Yeah.
It's how you say it.
It's all about those unspoken things.
So you really need to be aware of those nuances, or else you're bound to have some miscommunications, right?
I'll tell you.
And you're going to miss out on opportunities.
You're not going to get that deal
Yeah.
if you don't know how to play the game.
And the thesis really emphasizes, I think, the importance of adapting your business model to these local expectations.
You can't just, assume that what works in your home country is going to automatically translate to a new market.
Right.
You can't just impose your way of doing things.
Yeah.
You've got to be flexible.
Mm-hmm.
You've got to be willing to adjust.
It's like that story about Tesco, right?
Oh, yeah, Tesco.
They basically just ignored the American love of coupons.
Yeah, they didn't get it.
And they paid the price.
Can you imagine walking into a Tesco in America expecting to, find your stack of coupons,
Ugh.
and there are none.
Nothing.
It just doesn't compute.
They didn't adapt.
They didn't adapt.
So it really goes to show that even these huge, giant global companies can really stumble if they don't understand these cultural differences.
It's a humbling reminder.
Yeah, it really is. So, okay, business culture is obviously important, but what about corporate culture? How do you maintain your company's own values
Right.
and that identity when you're operating in this totally different context?
That's the challenge, isn't it?
It's a balancing act.
You want to maintain your core values,
Mm-hmm.
but you also have to be sensitive to the local norms and customs.
So how do you find that sweet spot?
Well, the thesis really dives into the challenges of managing this corporate culture in a foreign environment.
Like, what kind of challenges are we talking about specifically?
Well, for one, you've got to think carefully about who you send to represent your company abroad.
Okay, so like your expats.
Yeah, the expats.
And what should companies be looking for in an expat?
The thesis stresses the need for people who aren't just,
Mm-hmm.
technically skilled.
Right.
They need to be culturally sensitive.
Mm-hmm.
They need to be adaptable.
Be able to roll with the punches.
Right.
And they've got to have really strong communication skills.
Because they're basically your ambassadors, right?
They're the bridge between headquarters and the new market. I can see how finding the right people for that role would be crucial.
Absolutely.
It's not easy.
Oh, yeah, it's not.
And then even once you have your team in place, you need to be really mindful about how you manage them.
Oh, yeah, management styles.
Because what works in one culture...
might totally backfire in another.
Right, exactly.
The thesis has this great tip for managers, and it's to pay attention to the importance of positive feedback.
Oh, interesting.
In some cultures,
Yeah.
like in France, for example,
Mm-hmm.
feedback tends to be more focused on areas for improvement.
Okay.
But in other countries, positive reinforcement can be really crucial for those employees to feel valued and motivated.
So if you have a manager who's just, used to giving that kind of critical feedback.
Right, and they go into a new culture
Yeah.
where people are expecting more praise and recognition.
It could really create some friction.
Yeah, could be a recipe for disaster.
Wow. So much to think about.
There really is.
So we've got our strategy, we've done our market analysis, we've considered the institutional challenges and opportunities, we're being culturally sensitive, we're building our networks. Is there anything else we need to think about for international expansion?
Don't forget about the people,
The people.
internal and external.
Right, yeah. The thesis talks a lot about this, about the importance of investing in human capital.
And they really focus on those two key areas, top management and employees.
Okay, so let's start with top management. What are some of the key insights there?
Well, when it comes to building a leadership team for your subsidiary, the thesis suggests a good mix of expats and local managers.
So you're bringing in people from headquarters.
They have that understanding of the company culture.
Right, they know the ropes.
They know the ropes.
But you're also bringing in people who really understand the local market.
Exactly.
It's the best of both worlds.
It is. It's finding that balance.
Yeah.
And they highlight some key qualities to look for in those expats. You want someone who is trustworthy, adaptable, has international experience,
Makes sense.
and of course, culturally sensitive.
Right, got to have that cultural intelligence.
Because these are the folks who are really embodying your company culture
Hmm.
in this new environment.
It's a big responsibility.
It is. It is.
And the thesis even mentions that a mixed board with representation from both the parent company and the local market can be more effective.
yeah, makes sense.
It brings more diverse perspectives to the table.
Mhm.
So top management is critical, but finding the right employees can be just as crucial, right?
Absolutely.
What do companies need to keep in mind when recruiting and retaining local talent?
The thesis has some great advice from companies who have done this successfully.
Okay,
First, you want to look for employees who are open to working in an international environment.
makes sense.
They've got to have strong communication skills.
Including language proficiency, I imagine.
Yes, absolutely.
If they're going to be interacting with headquarters.
And ideally, you want someone who is motivated and committed to long-term employment.
Right, because high turnover can be a real killer.
It can really set you back.
All that time and money spent on training,
And building trust,
getting everyone up to speed.
yeah, it's a huge loss.
Yeah.
The thesis even suggests offering things like equity or profit sharing
Oh, interesting.
to those local employees to really incentivize that long-term commitment.
That's a great idea. It gives them more of a stake in the company's success.
Yeah, exactly.
Wow, we have covered a lot of ground today.
We have.
We talked about strategy, market analysis, institutions, cultural differences, networks, the importance of finding the right people.
It's a lot to take in.
It really is.
But I think the key takeaway for our listeners is that international expansion is a complex journey. It requires careful planning, strategic decision-making, cultural sensitivity, and a whole lot of flexibility.
Yeah, you've got to be willing to adapt.
But with the right approach,
Mm-hmm.
it can be an incredibly rewarding experience.
For everyone involved.
Absolutely.
So as you're thinking about taking your company global, I want to leave you with this thought-provoking question. Given your company's specific goals and resources, which of these factors that we've talked about today would you prioritize when considering a greenfield investment, and why? Think about that. And even though there's always more to learn, you now have a solid foundation for navigating this exciting, challenging, and ultimately rewarding world of international expansion. Thanks for joining us for the deep dive.